TellyCast.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to another TellyCast. Now and again, we record interviews with execs that we hold on to and play out on the show a few weeks later. And that's the case this week as we rewind to Mia in Rome, where I met executive producer Chiara Messineo from Raw, and also back to MIPCOM, where I had a quick chat with Danny Fenton from Zig Zag Productions. First up, here's Chiara. How are you doing, Chiara?
Hey, hi, Justin. I'm doing really well. It's a great day. The sun is shining, and I couldn't think of a better place to be.
Yeah, it makes it all the more pleasant to come to industry events, doesn't it?
Oh my God, yeah. Yes, especially when you're coming from London.
That's right.
Yes, where autumn has definitely started. And I come from Sicily originally, even though I've lived in England for nearly 30 years. And I have to say that even though I love London and I wouldn't live anywhere else, I really miss the sun. This level of sunshine is like my average level that I function best at.
Listen, thank you for agreeing to have a chat. So you're an executive producer and director who's worked on lots of premium factual shows for Raw. Tell us about a few of those and what you think your speciality has become, because a lot of them have got a UK and Italian mix and flavour. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I started working with Raw about 5 years ago because they were looking for somebody to develop the CNN program that went on to be Searching for Italy for Stanley Tucci. They obviously were looking at somebody who had an expertise in travelogues and Italy. I have done a lot of travelogues, even though I wouldn't say, it's not exclusively what I've done in the past, because I've done a lot of specialist factual stuff and food and culture related and art stuff. But when I started working with Raw, it was in view to develop that series, and it was a fantastic experience. And we worked together for several months to create what went on to be a really extremely successful series that is now on the BBC and has won multiple Emmys. And for me, I was part of the very first series. And for me, really like establishing a new way of looking at Italy through the gateway of food with a fantastic host like Stanley. It was a great challenge. We wanted to create a sort of new language, and I think we succeeded in doing that. It was a great time for me also to experiment with a different way of making things, because I spent nearly all of my career making things sort of on behalf of English people or American people in Italy, being Italian. But working with this within the setup with Raw was really a different experience for the first time, because it didn't feel like I had to have a sort of like British mentality or a British way of looking at things. They have always been cutting edge storytellers, and they were really open to seeing things from a different perspective. And it was really great for me to be able to really bring out stories that were quintessentially Italian, not very well known, not your stereotypical Italian stories, and give a voice to Italian people and situations and stories that had never been heard before through the medium of food, with Stanley, who is a great collaborator and host. So that made me feel like, okay, so maybe this is like a place where I really want to work. And in the meantime, I had started developing a series that was a completely different series, that was a Netflix series. From the beginning, I thought about it for Netflix, and I brought it to Raw. And it was an Italian story that's very, very well known in Italy, that went on to become the Vatican Girl series, which has again been a great collaboration with Raw, because they had just done Don't Fuck With Cats, which was amazing and had been super successful for Netflix. And Mark Lewis, the director, was interested in Vatican Girl, the project, and so we started this collaboration, and it was a fantastic experience because we managed to elevate a very, very local story into a global story. And in Italy, it had an amazing cultural impact. It became a source of cultural phenomenon, and the Vatican opened an inquiry as a result of the series, and the Parliament is in fact voting today whether they want to open an inquiry. Coincidentally, this morning there's going to be a vote at the Senate. There is a third judicial inquiry that's been opened, and all of this is a result of a series, which is phenomenal. I think for a documentary filmmaker, there isn't anything more than you can aspire to than have an impact, a real life impact in what you do.
So for those who haven't seen The Vatican Girl, tell us a little bit about it, and not only the story but how you got the access, because that's something that you've done throughout your career. Access is something that has been a real sort of specialism in your superpower almost. So first of all, tell us about The Vatican Girl for those who haven't seen it.
So it's a 4-part series, and it's a story that happened here in 1983 in Rome. A 15-year-old girl, Emanuela Orlandi, went missing. And to this day, we don't know exactly what happened to her. And the story of a very, very simple disappearance has majestic geopolitical repercussions that still to this day have shaken the world to the core, because they involve the various different powers within this city that are the criminal powers, the Vatican, and various other political influences. And it's really difficult to imagine how something that seems so small and inconsequential, like one girl disappearing, can involve a whole nation and more than one nation, and a pope that is considered a saint for the Catholic Church, and entire groups of criminal organizations that have operated within the capital. This is exactly what the story was. And it still is a very difficult story to tell, but a very important story to tell. I worked on this access for many years together with my colleague who's no longer with us, Aurelio Laino. And we thought that one of the most important things and the reasons why we wanted to tell this story was that the family of this girl have been fighting to have the truth without stopping for 40 years. And somehow we thought that if we managed to tell the story in a way that it was never told before, that could be elevated to the rest of the world, not just to Italy, the telling of the story could have a really big impact. And that's definitely what ended up happening, because I think that Netflix spearheaded the interest for this story, and it sort of ballooned, and it made it so that everybody who is Catholic, probably, that has Netflix in the world has watched it. And in some way, especially the youngest generations, have decided that it's no longer right for the Vatican to not do anything about this, and which is why in the end the Vatican probably felt like they had to do something about it. So you were asking me about the access, and I think that for me, access is the most complex thing about what I do and the most exciting thing about what I do, because it's not just about getting a signature, it's not about like a contract, it's about an ongoing conversation with the people that you are working with. Because at the end of the day, for you, it's always going to be just a job, and for them, it's their whole life. And it's the case definitely for the Orlandi family, but for every single person that we interviewed, they had a stake in the game, and this story was a fundamental part of their life. And even thinking about with them and with the contributors about the implications of telling the story and thinking with them about how they want to tell that story has to be a real ongoing conversation and making people aware of what the consequences are going to be is a very delicate kind of relationship. And for me, that is also the most rewarding part of what I do. I never would take on a project unless I thought that it was beneficial in some way for those people to tell that story. Because I feel like there are many ways in which human beings make sense of the world, and sometimes them sharing the way that they make sense of the world or a story is all they have to give to the world. So like guiding them while they are doing that is a great, great privilege.
Being behind such a impactful series that has had such repercussions, how's that affected you? Obviously it's had huge effects for the family. As a filmmaker, and with this getting elevated, as you say, up to Italian Parliament, etc., how's it affected you since it came out?
I felt like everything that was done was useful. It was an extraordinary feat, and definitely probably the biggest thing I've ever done, and an ambitious project beyond any comprehension in a way that I'd never done before. But it made me feel like nothing was wasted in some way. And also it made me really reflect on the power of a really well-told story. And I think that we are surrounded by stories, and taking time to really think about how to tell a story is so important, because I think that without a doubt, if the story hadn't been told so effectively, this impact would have not been the same. So I think it's changed me as a person, because I think as a documentary filmmaker, I've put a lot of emphasis in trying to find the right story, and I've put a lot of emphasis in creating the opportunities for the stories to be told. But I think in this time, I had the opportunity to really invest in the craft much more than I'd done before. And I think that effort paid off. One of the things that we are doing at Raw is very much like sort of genre busting work, and thinking about how do we tell the story in a way that's never been told before? How do we do this in a way that's never been done before? And all of these questions, and the people that I'm surrounded with are super, super talented. The idea of like all coming together and thinking about, okay, so this is the story, but really, what is the best way for this to come across? That really is amazing. It's a great buzz.
It's a real intellectual challenge, isn't it? Because when you see stories and multi-layered stories, and the way that stories are told, and revelations when they happen and how they happen and how that takes the story on, is what makes factual production, elevates it up to that, super premium level that does have that impact. And that's something, obviously, we've seen Raw do that on a number of different occasions with a number of their different projects. Before we started talking, you mentioned something about country busting, which I thought was a really interesting term in terms of what your specialism has been, which is working on Italian stories, but working with Italian stories from a different angle, perhaps, that have been taken before, but
not exclusively Italian.
Not exclusively, okay.
I think I'm very much starting to look at European stories, not just European, but stories like from places where we normally don't hear stories from, because whether we like it or not, there is a monopoly of British and American stories out there. We often hear stories of like the big names, and the big names in mainstream culture are sort of Hollywood or maybe still quite from an Anglo-Saxon world. I just feel like for me, it's such an important thing to remember that there are so many other cultures. And it's a little bit what I was saying before about like not telling stories from an imperialistic background. Even when I worked in the past on other program from from the BBC or from American corporations, I would come to Italy and I would sort of make programs about Italy from their perspective. And that was always really difficult for me, because I really sit across these two cultures fully. I am sort of a sort of mix between, I don't really even know whether I'm more British or Italian anymore, to be honest. And I think I don't want to know. I don't want to choose, and I don't want to, because what I think is that is really important is that a story is a story, a good story. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Everybody should have access to more than just American or British stories. And it's a matter of how you tell the stories. It's not a matter of like whether the stories are from America or from Spain or Portugal or Italy. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is finding those stories that have the potential to be elevated to universal, global stories. And I have started a lot of really great conversations with some producers, in Europe, and I'm really hoping to be able to do that more and more, because I think that we're all hungry for different perspectives. We're really all in need to really look at the world more deeply, more profoundly from different perspectives that are different to what we've seen up until now.
But obviously it's the human condition, but it's just different ways of looking at it. That's really interesting. And now you're working on another Netflix project at the moment, which you can't talk about,
Nope.
I know.
Nope.
I hate that, then you can't talk about,
But it's going to be amazing. I can tell you.
Well, I'm sure it will, if it's anything like your previous projects. So let's talk a little bit about Mia. Is this your first time here, or are you a regular?
It was my second time. We presented Vatican Girl last year. Now I have become part of the board, which is a great honor, because it's great to be on the map. Also, somebody who is Italian but works in a British company. It's great for people to know that there is a possibility out there to collaborate with people in Britain. And I'm one of those always looking for amazing stories.
Do you think that UK and Italian co-productions, have there been many in the past particularly? Because I'm trying to think of any that spring to my mind. I can't really think of any.
No, I think that I'm trying to do the impossible. It's not the impossible, but it's such a really different way of thinking. But I do think that there is such a huge benefit in collaborating with another culture that is different from yours, because we all learn so much more when these collaborations work. It's always challenging, but I think at the end of the day, when you're working with super creative people, it's mind-boggling how incredible it can be when two different people from two different cultures that are very talented come together. It's like nothing else. It makes you feel like this is why we're here doing this job, because at the end of the day, art has only one language. And I'm not saying that we're all making art, but in some way, even when we're not making art, a lot of what we do has to do with art. And I think that really stories and human stories are a common language that we all can share. And so when we find those points where we find a point in common, there is actually nothing better.
I'm just going to ask you one final question as well. It's coming back to an earlier point that you made about searching for those stories. How do you do that? Is it just a case of picking up a newspaper or hearing a radio conversation, or where do these story leads come from?
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that. I think obviously there are lots of people whose job is, we have an incredible team, a development team at Raw, whose job is looking at newspapers, like you say, and looking at all of the, sort of reading the zeitgeist and thinking about what is next. But I think the really, really good stories are always when you make connections that you never thought were possible. And I think that I'm very lucky because I am a really innately curious person. If I'm sitting in a bus, I'm immediately listening to what the people around me are talking about. And if I'm curious enough, I will ask people questions. I just don't have any shame when it comes to that. And it's always like that. So the best stories and the best things in relation to stories that have been gifted to me have always had to do with connections that I could make only because I am slightly weird. And so it's my weirdness and my ability to just open my life out and my ears out that has led me to the places that are less known, and so that, like, inevitably there'll be somebody who has heard of something that will come up to you and say, I'll tell you this is what happened. And often it's not something that's been published in a newspaper, or maybe that was published in a newspaper but 20 years ago, buried somewhere and nobody listened, and then you're like, wow, like, this is incredible. Best thing that we can do, I think, as producers is make those connections, make things happen that wouldn't happen if it wasn't for your own special lenses that you look things through.
Yeah, stay curious, essentially.
Yeah. And this is also, incidentally, what AI will never be able to do, because AI will always give you what's already been digested by some other human being. But I think if the people that don't normally talk to the media types are interrogated about the stories that they are carrying, they're not going to be inside any AI system. And so that's kind of what our job is, to stay curious and look for things in places where we haven't looked at.
Chiara, thank you so much for spending time. It's a really fascinating conversation. I could speak with you a lot longer, and I'm sure there's loads of other projects we haven't even spoken about that are equally fascinating. When's your next Netflix show going to be out? Is that going to be 2024, or is it going to be a little bit later?
I think it's going to be a little bit later, yeah. But okay. I'll definitely contact you and I'll let you know when.
All right, fantastic. Well, it sounds like it's a big one. So
yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you again. Lovely to meet you.
Great. Thank you so much.
So here we are, day one of MIPCOM 2023. I'm here with Danny Fenton from Zig Zag Productions. Danny, how are you?
I'm good, Justin. It's lovely to be back in the south of France.
It is indeed. We spoke to you a few weeks ago for the TellyCast podcast, and we talked about how you were going around the world and seeing what new deals you could do and what new markets you can unlock for factual production. How's that going? Are you doing lots of international meetings here at MIPCOM?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about coming to MIPCOM is that all of those people come to one place. So, the conversations we've been having that I told you about with Saudi Arabia, with China, with South Africa are all happening here as a follow-on. Unfortunately, the only ones we're not able to have are with the partners we have in Israel who haven't been able to attend for obvious reasons. But yeah, generally speaking, all the people that we've been speaking to in other countries are here. So that makes this a sort of one-stop shop.
And you're one of the hardest working producers, I know, when it comes to working the market and getting the right meetings in. How's it looking this year? Is your diary as packed as ever?
It's very kind of you to say I'm one of the hardest working. I'm sure there are many more and more hard working. I always feel like I like to look like I'm a swan, gliding on the surface, but kicking furiously underneath the water. Working hard is a necessity in this industry. I always think there are a lot more clever people than me, so I have to work that bit harder to keep up with the clever people. I have 68 meetings in the next 3 days. So that's a meeting every half an hour, no toilet breaks, and a couple of breaks for eating.
Extraordinary stamina. So what are you pitching?
We're pitching many things to many different people, and obviously every show that we're pitching is a bespoke, beautiful thing. But part of our philosophy, or my philosophy, is if you shake enough trees, some coconuts will have to fall out. So even this morning on the first day of the market, we've had 2 offers on 2 projects. So those offers almost make it worthwhile in itself to be here. We are pitching, factual projects. We have access to the International Legion in Ukraine for a 6-part series where we have half the money. We're trying to find the rest of the money here. We are pitching some formats. We range all the way from sort of feature-length, award-winning documentaries all the way through to shiny floor game shows. So we have a game show that we are partnering with a South African producer on that we're looking to launch here as well. So there are numerous different projects that we're pitching here and looking for numerous different buyers.
So lots of international countries coming together, more than there have been probably since before COVID. So you're finding business is being done?
Business is definitely being done. I can testify that just from this morning's interest in a couple of our projects. What's interesting as a UK producer with a US presence is there are a lot less UK and US buyers here than there have been historically. But as we discussed on the podcast a few weeks ago, the UK and US markets are quite flat. So what is great about being here is it's those buyers from other countries who are looking to buy. And what you hope is that people who are coming to MIPCOM as buyers are coming because they want to spend money on buying shows, not just on having nice meals and a good time. So we are seeing, and when I say we've got 68 meetings, I reckon we're probably seeing people from at least 50 different countries within that. So it's a real, across the board geographical reach.
And you told us about your project in China, the Great Wall of China project travel show. China are back and back in force for the first time in about 3-4 years. Are you seeing lots of Chinese businesses and working with them in terms of co-productions and new projects?
So we have this new project that you mentioned that is launching at this market, the Great Wall, with Ash Dykes, which will be airing in China, I think, next week on CCTV. Yes, China's back in a big way at the market, which we haven't seen since pre-pandemic. We are talking to China about other projects. I'd say Asia is back in a big way in general. There's a lot more people from Korea I'm seeing here, and Thailand, Singapore. So I think the Asian market is back in a big way. And the other big market seems to be the Middle East. There's a strong Middle Eastern presence as well.
So from an experienced producer to a newbie who's attending the market as a producer from whatever country they're from, what would be your top tips for having a successful MIPCOM?
I mean, my top tip, but it might be a bit late to tell people this now, is to pre-book your meetings. So I bumped into a producer actually at the airport who'd booked last minute. And I said to him, how many meetings have you got? And he said, no, I haven't got any meetings. I'm just going to go down and see who I can meet. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea, because if you're a new producer, you want to get a flavour of the market, you want to walk around the Palais, you want to see what ideas are out there. That's great. But I think if you really want to get business done, you have to be prepared and you have to plan your meetings, and you have to have 68 meetings back to back over 3 days.
And that takes a couple of months to set up in advance, right?
Yeah, I think, Mia Zig Zag, very well, she started booking meetings in August, and I bumped into somebody last week who's a broadcaster, and I said, when did you start booking your meetings? And they said they closed their diary about a month before MIP. So it's almost like you can't go too soon in trying to book your meetings for MIP. And I think if you want to get something meaningful out of the market, you want to have pre-planned meetings.
All right, that's good advice. Danny Fenton from Zig Zag Productions, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's it for this week's show. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in Rome and Cannes. Next week, we're chatting with award-winning digital studio The Soul Publishing. Until then, stay safe.